clear from what your chairman has just said that I'm in friendly hands tonight, and many of your objectives accord absolutely with what the government is trying to achieve. I thought that the most useful thing I could do was to speak for perhaps about 10 minutes on how we are changing development under the coalition government, and then to try and answer any questions that you may have. And if there aren't any questions, then perhaps we'll have a chance to meet informally, Mr. Chairman. So let me start with the coalition's views on development and how we're changing policy. And perhaps I can make the point that I was in post as the opposition spokesman on development for 5 years before the election came and before we formed the coalition government. And there is absolutely nothing whatsoever to be said for opposition. It is a bloody experience, except for one point, which is that you are able, in the fallow years of opposition, to think through policy ideas. You're able to go and sit at the feet of the people who know most about any particular policy. And in my case, to travel to something like 38 countries, to look specifically at an issue, to look, for example, at the plight of the cotton growers in Mali, and see how they are prevented from achieving a living wage by the protectionist policies of America and indeed of the European Union, to go and look at disability in Cambodia and Laos, to look at issues of HIV, AIDS in Uganda, and indeed the first time I ever went to Rwanda, to look at how on earth people who have been caught up in a most terrible conflict reconcile themselves when that conflict is over. And so it means that when we came into government, we arrived with a very clear agenda, which was really fashioned around three particular points. And the first of these is an acceptance and an understanding that above all it is conflict which condemns people to remain poor and in poverty. For the very obvious reason that if you are a girl growing up in a conflict state that is very poor, you suffer all the afflictions of poverty and then are doubly afflicted by the fact that you are frightened by the conflict going on around you. And therefore tackling conflict is at the heart of everything we do. And in just the same way that conflict mires people in poverty, so it is wealth creation, trade, the sinews of the private sector, having an independent judiciary so that people will invest and know that they will be treated fairly and not at the whim of a politician, a country that cherishes its entrepreneurs. All those things help to lift people out of poverty. And there is no magic to this. Even the Labour Party got to this point at the end of their last term in government, in understanding the power of the private sector as the engine of development. Although I would say that I think under the bedclothes late at night, Labour spokesmen saw the private sector as the enemy and not as the engine of development. But it is jobs which help people to lift themselves out of poverty. 90% of all the jobs around the world are created by the private sector and not by governments. And thirdly, that it is only by demonstrating the effectiveness of aid spending that you will maintain public support for that expenditure. And we have been very clear since day one that the fact that the budget is ring-fenced imposes upon us a double duty to ensure that this money is really well spent. And we have focused on the securing of results. We conducted a bilateral aid review of all the different countries in which Britain had a country-to-country programme. We reduced the number of country-to-country programmes from 43 to 27, and we looked at all 43 of the multilateral agencies which Britain funds and worked out whether or not they were delivering value for money. And we were ruthless in pursuing the conclusions of these reviews, stopping aid even before the review to China and to Russia, and through the reviews making it clear that we would withdraw from these 16 countries because, for one reason or another, it was not a good use of British taxpayers' money. And on the multilateral aid review, we were, again, ruthless in saying that there were some, like UNICEF, which were doing a very good job, so we doubled the core funding to UNICEF. Others, which we need, but which were not delivering well, which we put into special measures. Others, which we gave an agenda of reform to, and their future funding will depend upon them embracing that agenda to reform, and 10% of them, which we just said we weren't going to fund anymore, and we withdrew. And it is focus on results. The promise, for example, to get 11 million children into school over the next 4 years, but at 2.5% of the cost of educating a British child, to get more clean water and sanitation to people than the total population of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, and to vaccinate more children that live in the whole of the United Kingdom. By pursuing these results, we're able to underline that aid where it is spent well creates miracles. There are 3 million girls in school in Afghanistan today who would not be in school were it not for the international aid effort. We have eradicated smallpox. Well, extraordinarily important, this year we've eradicated rinderpest, which kills such a huge number of cattle in Africa. This is all as a result of the effectiveness of aid. So those are the 3 big changes we have made. Why have we done this? Because there are 2 key reasons why we stand by this budget. The first is that it is undoubtedly in our national interest. If you take a country, for example, like Somalia, we are dealing today with the consequences of not having tackled the causes of deep poverty and dysfunctionality, because we are now having to deal with the symptoms as they burst out in terms of drug running, piracy, the spread of disease, conflict, terrorism and migration, all things which directly affect our security here in Britain. So tackling conflict is severely in our national interest. It makes us safer. Our own security is not just achieved by guns and bullets, it's also achieved by training the police in Afghanistan, building up government structures in the Middle East, by getting girls into school in the Horn of Africa. All those things contribute to our security, as well as the brilliant military who look after us every day of the year. The other reason is that it is the right thing to do, and you see this as part of Britain's DNA wherever you look. If you look, for example, at Comic Relief, which takes place every 2 years, and in the last 3 occasions it has taken place against an economic background that was deteriorating. People were more generous to help those in a desperate position. You see it, for example, in the generosity of the public display on the Disasters Emergency Committee appeal in the Horn of Africa, where people across Britain have given huge amounts of money to support the famine relief and the effort to save the lives of literally hundreds of thousands of children under the age of 5 who will die but for international intervention from starvation or from the disease which paradoxically comes when the rains come, and which waterborne disease then spreads through a malnourished and very vulnerable community. So I would argue it's part of the British DNA to be generous to those who are living in wretched and desperate conditions, and that as a country we should be very proud of that. And I'm personally enormously proud to be a member of a government that has stood by its commitments to the poorest people in the world, and has made clear that we won't balance the books on the backs of the poorest people in Britain or in the most difficult, wretched and desperate parts of the world. But as I say, we will only maintain this public support for this if we are absolutely ruthless in prioritising value for money and securing the results, and also changing the focus of development policy into this whole business of wealth creation, supporting the trade, private sector, entrepreneurialism on the one hand as the key ladder out of poverty, and bearing down on conflict as the key thing which determines the scale and depth of poverty around the world. It remains the case that there is no conflict country that is either caught in conflict or just emerging from conflict which will today meet any of the Millennium Development Goals in 2015. And that underlines the government's commitment to this. Now let me conclude my remarks with 2 points which I hope you will find of interest. The first is that we have determined that every year we will have one key event which will demonstrate Britain's development effectiveness and also act as a rallying cry for taxpayers so they can really see how their money is being spent. And this year it was the support for the replenishment of the Global Alliance of Vaccines and Immunisation in London, led by our Prime Minister in an absolutely brilliant speech which he delivered, which secured a standing ovation from a pretty hard-bit group of journalists and development actors here in London when we exceeded the target of replenishment, which was $3.7 billion, and managed to secure $4.3 billion to vaccinate more than 250 million children around the world. And Britain's contribution to this will be that we will, over the next 4 years, vaccinate a child every 2 seconds and save the life of a child every 2 minutes from diseases which none of our children die from in Britain. And I think it's a wonderful thing that Britain has helped to procure. It will save an enormous number of lives over the next 4 years. And 88% of the public approve of this action that we are taking. You may well wonder about the other 12%, but the fact is you don't get more than 88% for almost anything in Britain. And I think it underlines the importance of what we are doing. And next year we hope to do something to ensure that all women have choice over whether and when they have children by making contraceptives much more universally available than they are today. And in the following year we hope to do something about hunger and starvation. It is appalling that in our world today any child should die painfully and slowly of starvation. And for the third year, that is, I think, the area where we will be active. The second thing I wanted to say in finishing was that we have conducted some very interesting polling over the summer about public attitudes to development. And I share it with you because I think it is extremely important. If you ask the question about whether you approve of the government standing by its development policies and priorities and commitments at a very difficult economic time for our country, in the summer, 48% said yes, 38% said no, so a 10% lead. It is still allowed, of course, the tabloid press to say that under half the country support the government's development policies, but you will appreciate that securing a 48% approval rate in any area of government policy is not a bad result. Now, recently, in the last few weeks, those figures had risen to over 50% and 37%. So a lead of 10% has gone up effectively to a lead of 14%, which against the current background, I think is quite a good result. But those figures conceal something extremely important, which is that there was a much bigger lead amongst women and a much bigger lead amongst those under the age of 35 years old. And, you know, for a coalition government that is concerned about an apparent diminution of support amongst women for our policies, that is to be borne in mind, in addition to which, of course, this is an area of public policy which acts as a permission for people who in the past have liked some of what the Conservative Party has done, particularly in the economic area, but never felt they could vote for the Conservatives because of the other baggage. The fact that we have stood by this commitment, that as a party, increasingly we are passionate about trying to do something about the wretched conditions that I have described, which more than 1 billion people in our world live in, that too acts as a permission for people who have not voted Conservative before to at least consider doing so. And for that reason, I think the polling is significant. I was asked by a bunch of French members of Parliament who support development, but who said that they couldn't possibly go out and argue for it amongst their constituents, and how were we able to achieve the policies and the approval rate that we have in Britain. What my advice was. And my advice to them was to go out and bat for this. You know, if you refuse to go out and engage with the arguments and put the case, then of course that inevitably means you won't get your point across. And I think the Prime Minister has been very effective, members of the coalition government have been very effective at making the case, arguing for these policies, because they are the right thing to do, and they are hugely in our national interest. And I will rest my case, if I may, at that point. Thank you very much indeed.